Hi, I'm Sandy Genovese and welcome to this episode of the Ellison Education video series. We're going to be talking today about square root. And in order to work with square root with your students, it's helpful if you have a lot of squares. And in order to do that, it's helpful to have a die like this that has multiple squares on one. If you look here, you can see there's 3 across and 4 down. So it results, there are 12 squares on this one block. And because I'm cutting through 5 sheets of construction paper at one time, that means that each time I run it through, I'm really cutting 60 squares. So what I'm going to do is run it through the Big Shot Pro machine. So once I place the cutting pad on the top, I'm going to just roll it through. And this way, I mean, if you tried to cut all the squares that you're going to want to use with scissors, it would just, or even on a paper trimmer, it would still take a really long time. But this way, you can see how quickly and easily you can really create just a ton of squares. And of course, the colors that you want are just going to be based on what colors, construction paper you choose to put in there. Now, when you talk about square root, when I was a student, I knew that 6 times 6 was 36, so in some way I realized that 36, the square root of 36 was 6. But if you asked me the square root of 35, I couldn't tell you because I didn't really understand what square root was. And really what it is, square root is really square sides. So if you look at an example, if you hand a whole batch of these squares to the students and you ask them to take 9 squares and build the largest square that is possible to build, they will end up with something that looks like this. So then you'll ask them, how many did it take to make one side of that square? And they'll say, well, when they laid 9 squares down and made a big square out of it, it took 3 to make one side. So the square root of 9 is 3. But that's not enough. You need to really understand the concept in order to understand, well, what would then the approximate square root of 10 be? Or what would the approximate square root of 11 be? So ask them to take then 11 squares. So here would be how that would look. If they make the largest square with 11, which would be the red squares, it still makes a square that has 3 sides. This is still the largest square. So the square root approximately of 11 is 3 and something. You need to know the numerator and the denominator. Well, the numerator is the 2 squares that were left over in order to create 3 and 2 somethings. Now, in order to get the bottom number, the denominator, you need to see how many squares would it take in order to complete the next largest size square. So if I lay them down, it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares to make the next biggest square. So the approximate square root of 11 is 3 and 2 sevenths. And it works, believe it or not, for any number that you want to throw out. You know, this is such a simple and visual way to explain square root, and it requires simply a stash of squares for each student.